Hello everyone, my name is Bruna Tedesco and I am a PhD student of Geotechnical Engineering, University of Brasilia. I had my grade secondment in Strathclyde University in Glasgow in June 2017. My research topic is about design of crushable particles in DEM based on single grain compression. Grain crushing controls significantly response in shear of granular materials and has an impact on the collapse mechanism of geostructures. It's a critical of soil behavior and it's a result of a number of relatively complex microprocesses. It's commonly accepted that the crushing of a grain occurs due to a tensile failure in its tensile strength. The particle strength can be indirectly measured by geometrical compression. Largely used is the slow compression test that's conducted by placing an individual particle between two flat and applying uniaxial compression to the particle until fracture. The main advantage of this technique is the possibility of recording the deformations in order to determine the load deformation profile. The variable statistic distribution is widely accepted as a probabilistic representation of the tensile strain on brittle ceramics. Variable assumes that the survival of a block of a material under tensions requires that all its constituent parts remain intact. From this, variable determines the survival probability. This probability takes into account the nature of the material forming the block. Sigma 0, in his expression, is the tension that guarantees that 37% of the tested particle survives, and m is the variable modulus that decreases with the increase in tension. It represents the standard deviation. The applicability of variable depends that all particles are geometrically similar and have the same coordination number. The discrete element method is one of the best numerical approaches for simulating the response of granular materials because it can adequately capture several aspects of the response of granular materials. Then also allows a better understanding of the response of granular materials at the particle scale and its interplay with macroscopic response. The DEM therefore becomes an almost obvious option to represent and analyze grain crushing in granular materials. There are two main approaches that can be used to represent grain crushing. The first one is the agglomerate method that consists in creating a particle by assembling a large number of smaller subparticles bonded together by adhesion forces. When the force at the contact between two subparticles exceeds the adhesion, the bonding is irreversibly broken. As the breakage occurs, the microparticles separate from its original particle, representing fragments. The main advantage of this approach is that it's more close to reality, and the disadvantages are the large number of particles necessary that requires an expensive computational cost and a huge time. The other method is the substitution method that replaces the original particle by smaller particles when a limit tension value is reached. The main advantage of this method is that it doesn't need so many particles, substituting only the ones that breaks. This makes the computational cost decrease and no longer a huge time will be necessary. The disadvantage, although, is that this method is not real, don't allow fragmentation, for example. The main objective of this research is design the agglomerate in order to match the variable distribution of tensile strength based on experimental crushing of a single grain. For this, the software YADE was used. YADE is an open source software that uses flexible object model and uses Python for concise scene construction. Initially, the influence of the particle internal variation of resistance in the crushing process was analyzed. For this, a first compression virtual test on a cylindrical particle was carried out. The particle is a cylinder formed by 13,000 of smaller spherical subparticles bounded together. The bounding between the subparticle is represented by adhesion force that follow a normal distribution of probability. The compression test was repeated 2,000 times, maintaining the same particle with the same subparticle positions and the same displacement rate of the top platen. The only variation imposed was the distribution of adhesion between the particles, though sampled from the same normal distribution. The differences in the adhesion between spheres and the particle brings up different particles' behavior. This can be seen in these graphs where the tested particles present different final resistance. Besides, this picture here also states the different behaviors found, as it can be seen that each particle will break in a specific manner. The manner in which a particle is oriented in a compression test also determines its breakage behavior. To investigate this aspect, a second series of virtual tests was carried out. An irregularly shaped particle was created by assembling spherical subparticles bounded together by adhesion force. In this case, all the particles have the same shape for all tests, have the same particles positions, have the same cohesion between the spheres, and have different rotation angle for each test. All the rotations are in the x-axis. In this stage, the particle is confined by 6 planes during the compression. This confinement is important to maintain the same inclination up to failure. If the particle would first rotate rigidly until a new contact point ensures zero moment on the particle, the rotation angles imposed and extracted from a normal distribution are represented. Once more, by the analysis of the graphs, it can be seen that to rotate the particle causes difference in the particle behavior. The difference in the crushing behavior can now be attributed to different configurations of internal forces generated by the relocation of the 6 contact points as the rotation angle is varied. Differently from the cylinder, the shaped particle presents intermediate breaks. This represents the fragmentation that's possible in the agglomerate approach. In the present cases, the fragmentation occurs due to the irregular shapes. These are examples of the different kinds of breakage depending on how the particle is being compressed. In the third series of tests, the same shaped particle was compressed. However, the particle orientation was maintained fixed, and the distribution of adhesion between subparticles varied according to the same probabilistic distribution as in the first series. One more time, all the other parameters of the simulation were maintained constant. Finally, the effect of the random particle orientated and adhesion between subparticles were analyzed together in the fourth series of tests. From some initial results, it was observed that a normal distribution of adhesion and initial rotation angle in a crushable particle appears to return successfully a viable distribution of particle tensile strength. It is also shown that the rotation angle plays a very critical role, and this should be taken into account when initially assembling the crushable particles. The rotation angle relocates the contact points, which in turn control the stress at which the particle breaks. It can finally be inferred that the shape of the particle should also play a critical role, as the shape controls the position of the contact points in a very similar